In the mid-1930s, the major passenger railroad companies put out a call to hire Negro men. That call initiated an important chapter in American history. My father worked for the railroad. That's why I'm here. My name is Tim Reed.
Black people migrated from Chicago and Kansas City, rural Arkansas and Texas, seeking employment in the Pacific Northwest. E. Sheldon Hill, who eventually served as executive director for the Urban League of Portland, shares his origin.
I was born on an Indian reservation in the Indian Territory, which is now the state of Oklahoma. By the time I was born, it was Indian Territory. And I grew up on the Indian reservation until I was about 6 or 7 years old. And of course, all of the people that I saw were Indians also. And how I happened to grow up on it, my father, who had been in the Indian Territory since he was about 16 years old, he had earlier been a drover, a cattle drover, and driving over the Chisholm Trail, driving cattle from West Texas into Wichita and Abilene and those Kansas towns where the railroad came. He had picked up 5 of the civilized tribe language, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Creek, and later became interpreter for the federal government. But at this time, he was the interpreter for the reservation. So all I saw was Indians. Actually, I was 6 years old, I saw a white person, and I ran. I thought it was a sick Indian.
Decision makers for the railroad companies envisioned the passenger rail business. As they plotted their way west, the railroads and the blacks generated a symbiotic connection. Seattle and Tacoma's maritime industry and more tolerant social fabric attracted black people as early as the Victorian era. They bought property and established small businesses which served the early railroad and ship laborers in Washington's largest black community. In the early 1900s, the Portland Hotel recruited from the state of Georgia an entire staff of black waiters and service people for its gracious dining facility. Known for its excellence, the hotel was selected to host President Theodore Roosevelt on his visit in 1906. This waiter prepares to serve him.
Now we're going into our meeting. Please stand, please. Brother Wilson, will you lead us in prayer, please?
First of all, we come today with
The men of the Railroad Senior Citizens Association in Oregon conduct their monthly business meeting for the purpose of fellowship and as an extension of their railroad days. Drawn together by their common experience and working conditions, the men often spent more time with each other than with their families. It is worth noting that none of these men are on public assistance. Their hard fight for fair labor practices had paid off. They are sustained by Social Security and railroad benefits, which were gained through a determined fight. 90% own their own homes. They survive by their motto, pay your bills and be a man. With Portland as the last city north of the Mason-Dixon line to ratify a civil rights ordinance, it is easier to understand the context in which these men settled and carved out an existence for their families. Now they boast of model neighborhoods and offspring that can take advantage of their pioneering and industrious attitude.
Accepted. Been moved, been seconded, that minutes be adopted as read. All in favor, let it be known to use side voting. I have. Is our benevolent chairman in?
I got his report.
Oh, you got the report? All right. Brother Jones, you may stand and make a report on the benevolent.
From the mid-19th century, Seattle had its black Victorians, proud and prominent, but not without problems. And Oregon, even with noted black cowboys, held a reputation for its laws which officially excluded Negroes and mulattoes until the 1920s. This climate subjected pioneering blacks to segregation and discrimination. Their story and those circumstances are entwined with railroad history and folklore.
In 1924, the Bowman Hicks Lumber Company reached out as far as Pine Bluff, Arkansas with the news of timber opportunities. Lafayette, Lucky Trice, made a pioneering response by moving to La Grande and working in the Wallowa Mountains in eastern Oregon. Called Lucky for his card playing, his mechanical knowledge of the Lima locomotive on a very specialized railroad made him indispensable to the logging operations. When the Depression shut down the industry, he survived as a respected small businessman in a sleepy little community. The La Grande Observer News describes him as having been a caring, involved citizen, businessman, and father of 7. Lafayette Lucky Trice, 1903 to 1985.
The jobs, red cap, porter, waiter, to name a few, were reserved exclusively for blacks. These service jobs tested their manhood, and because their abilities were tied to their income, they became specialists in their trade. The romance and speed of the new streamliner trains accelerated the passenger rail business. Black men were an integral part of that era. They were, by their work, an invaluable factor in the growing passenger traffic. For passengers, black men were often the most visible and trusted image of the railroad.
In working in the Pullman, we come in contact with all kind of people. I haul the President of the United States, I haul senators, I haul movie stars, and editors of some of your main magazines in America and all. So normally you come in with contact with a different type of people. The hardest thing that I found about the job as a whole was the long hours. See, the sleeping car department, we had such long hours. We was on duty 20 out of 24. And that's pretty long hours. You get so tired sometimes, but naturally we would kind of slip off, as they say, and steal off on the corner and take a nap on the side. And we got by. It was a rough job, but a lot of prejudice in it. But I found out that I learned how to cope with those things. But the main thing I was interested in was making a living for my family.
George Canada, the first Pullman porter promoted to Pullman conductor, successfully addressed the issue of manhood. He took pride in earning an honest living with a professional approach. The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, led by A. Philip Randolph, made a breakthrough in the working conditions and discriminatory practices of the Pullman Company in 1925. His persistent and diplomatic struggle influenced the civil rights movement 30 years later, and in the meantime gave hope and strategies to waiters, cooks, redcaps, and shop laborers who secured union protection by the late 1930s.
One summer I was sitting on the porch where I was rooming, because I've been on my own since I was 16. The family was all back in Oklahoma, so I'm strictly on my own. And one fella came by that I had known and began talking to me. And we were friends. I mean, at least we were acquaintances. And the lady with whom I was rooming asked me if I would like to have my friend some home brew. Home brew was something you made at home then. And I asked him if he wanted it, gave it to him. He never was noted for telling the truth there all the time. But after he asked me what was I doing, I told him I was working up in Bells at 9th Street Hotel. He said, why don't you come and go with me to Portland? I said, Portland what? You know, Portland, Maine. He said, Portland, Oregon. I said, for what? He said, to work. You make more money than you're going to make down at that hotel. I said, doing what? And he said, being a waiter, dining car waiter. I said, well, I've worked on a diner. He said, oh, but you're a waiter, I said, well, I wouldn't have enough money to get out there. And he said, I'll get you out there free. I said, well, even if I do and save that money, it cost me all of it to get back. He said, oh, no, I'll get you out there free. You can come back free. I said, you mean you can get me to Portland, Oregon free, and I can work this on the diner and make this money and come back free? He said, yes. He said, that's what I'm here for. I'm picking up some waiters for Union Pacific in Portland. But I'm still very, very young, you know, and Portland, Oregon is a long way from Kansas City. So I said, could you carry Ralph? That's a friend of mine. He said, sure, I'm carrying 10. Be down the station tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And told me exactly where to be. And I was down there, and sure enough, they were sending people to Portland. There were about 30 people lined up, but he was nowhere in sight. So the man who was interviewing them would ask what railroad they'd worked. These were all men. These were all, and many of them were experienced waiters, but he was weeding them out from one way to the other. And finally, it got to my friend. I'm counting because this fellow said 10, and he was giving them slips to go to the doctor. So he gave my friend, after he questioned him, and I'd count that was 10. And then he got to me. He said, "You a dining car waiter?" I said, "Yes." I don't know why I said it. He said, "You mighty short. How did you reach over by the window? I didn't even know dining cars had windows in them." And I said, "I'll reach it." So he told me to come back at 1, which I didn't do, because I understood he was going to send 10 and he'd give. But later on, my friend called me and said, "I thought you were going to be down and go to Portland with me." I said, I thought you were going to be down and fix it with the man. He said, "What did he say?" He said something about dining cars having windows on them. I fixed him. But later the man called me, not because of anything he said, and asked me to come back, and one of the persons had failed his physical, and I got shipped out.
Men from the Midwest migrated and established homes in the Pacific Northwest. They regularly returned to Kansas City and Chicago and Omaha, but as employees of the several railroads whose passenger trains connected the Midwest and the West Coast. After A. Philip Randolph, working conditions gradually improved. Former members of the dining car department share some of their working experiences.
When I first went to work, I think making down the beds at night over on 25 and 26, I think that was the most difficult thing that I had to do. It's one of the things that remains with me even today. Slept right in the dining car, and there was an area there that they called the possum belly, where they put the cots and the blankets and the bedding. And after we finished dinner that night, why, we had to go down in there, and they weren't sealed very tight. There was a lot of dust that got in there over a day's time. And we'd have to get those out of there, and part of the individual slept on cots. The other part slept on the chairs. And I disliked this more than anything. As a matter of fact, I almost went back to Kansas City because I wanted to get off of 25 and 26 and get on the Portland Roads, where we had dormitory cars. And they claimed that they didn't have a spot over there for me. So I told the superintendent that if he couldn't find a spot on there for me, to write me out a pass and send me back to Kansas City.
First trip I made, I was scared to death, to be honest with you. But once you get on and really learn the things they do on the dining car, the Union Pacific had a training program for you right on the training job. You really got training on the job, and being away from home was quite something to adjust to, especially if you had a family back home. But after a while, I think that you adjust to that, and I have to really thank my wife and my family for putting up with me for all those years. And it's really an adjustment that they have to make also, because you go on 5 days a week, and although when we get home we still had some time home with the family, but you had to leave too much. I mean, it was really an adjustment there that you'd have to make.
Holidays?
But oh yeah, you'd miss all the holidays. I mean, the holidays didn't mean anything. Anniversaries didn't mean anything. I mean, if you really had to go out, so you have to take your hat off to the family that you left behind.
Started in 1941. When I started, I came out as a waiter, but they sent me out as what they call a jitney man, that was sold sandwiches and coffee and milk, fruit, candy, and whatnot through the coaches, and sandwiches. And I did that until 1943. And I told them I didn't want to go out as no jitney man. I wanted to be a waiter. So they sent me out as a waiter, and didn't nobody want to be in the pantry, but I went out as an assistant pantryman. And an assistant pantryman, well, he always had a hard time because the the pantryman, he's always put the dirty work on the assistant.
On the pantryman's mule.
He was the pantryman's mule. That was exactly what I was, the pantryman's mule.
Well, we stocked the car. You'd come to work at, like, if you worked on, if you went out in the morning on what they call the pig, you come to work at 6 o'clock. The train left at 9. You had to get the supplies, and from the commissary. They'd load it up, and then they'd put them on a wagon, bring it around to the station in a truck, and put it on a wagon, and then you grab that tongue on that old wagon, which was if you worked in the station, like those baggage carts, those big old baggage carts.
Tied them to a truck.
Right. 2 or 3 of you get on, and one get on the tongue, and the others would push it on over onto the station and push it up to the back door or the side door of the diner. 2 or 3 guys would get in. The chef would be at the door, one door, throwing it in. The guy would be on the other end, taking it in. And you brought your stuff in, and cooks put their supplies away, the waiters put theirs away. We had ice boxes to put the supplies in. When you got all your stock in, and they'd bring the ice on. You know, at that time they were using regular ice blocks is right. You know, you put 50, 100, or 200 pounds of ice up, and ice down your ice cream. You had to chop it up with ice picks and put salt around it and pack it, you know. And, you know, it was all what we call from the nub in those days. That's right.
Nothing prepared for you.
No. And you'd get a case of oranges on, and after you got all your supplies on, then you'd cut the oranges by hand, and with that old hand rimmer, you'd squeeze the oranges and put them in your steel jars and put it for your fresh orange juice. It was fresh. It was fresh. When you started a meal, like our meal at that time, breakfast was the first meal, and the steward would seat the people, and you had a station. There were 6 stations on those old 36-seaters, a 4 and a deuce. And at that time, they were carrying 5 and 6 waiters. Each waiter had his own station, and they had an extra waiter that worked the coach service, which they called jitney, selling sandwiches and milk and coffee in the coaches with apples or, you know, whatever they put on the car to sell in the coaches. Well, when I first started, it was carrying the tray with 2 hands, because I'd never walked on a moving train with a tray in my hand. But really, well, even with a cup of coffee. Didn't have to be full of food. But then after I worked for a while, I became, you know, pretty adapted, carrying a tray with one hand. Some guys could carry backs, and most of us carried them, you know, underhanded with, you know, on your fingers, and you could maneuver it, and you could feel the sway of the train. The train moved, you go with it and balance your tray. In other words, most of the fellows that had been on the job for a while, well, they were acrobatical.
The Golden West Hotel, which many people did not know, was the 2nd largest black hotel in the United States, exceeded only by the Teresa in New York. Had 5 stories, elevator, bellhops, everything, but and was very profitable operation. But that is because out of here 17 boat lines ran out of here, plus the railroad, plus the Union Pacific, the Southern Pacific, the Great Northern, the SP&S, where people worked. And most of these were men without families. And then 17 boat lines ran out of here, where the men who were working on a boat. And so you always had a full house and restaurant. And plus the fact it had about the 1st or 2nd largest gambling house on the West Coast.
A family man as well as an astute businessman, W.D. Allen made his mark in early Portland.
World War II industry and the era of streamliner trains has meant permanent communities and contributions by blacks throughout the Northwest.
A bustling 1942 Union Station means the passenger rail business was bringing more people to the Northwest, including blacks, for jobs in the war industry.
And I don't think it was a man on there volunteered. I know I didn't volunteer. We was in uniform, supposed to be fighting for America. But that seemed very much unfair to me, but that's the way it was in those days. When we wound up, we was en route for 5 days and 5 nights, and we was coming to Vancouver Barrett. And we did get a pass to come out town like Vancouver and Poland. I'm gonna tell you that sign went up in all the places downtown in Vancouver, in a restaurant, places like that. Anyway, where you taverns, we catered the white trade only.
Yeah, I can remember there was only one restaurant that really let you come in to really eat, and that happened to be Jolly Jones, I think it was. They were on Broadway. It's all gone now. 1944 and 45, we started in a culture club, and this is one of the things that we did. We started depicting the places that didn't allow Negroes to come into it. We had to use back doors and things of this sort. Yeah. So you could start with the public school system, and you could start with jobs, housing. Those are the 3 major changes they have made here. It was a time, you could only buy a house in certain sections of Portland, but now that's no longer true. If you have the money, you can buy the house.
December the 31st, 1952, as a laborer.
As a laborer. What specifically was your job?
Cleaning coaches, sweeping the floor, washing engines, fueling engines, so forth. There was quite a bit of prejudice during the time that I started. Black people could only get laboring jobs. You couldn't be an engineer, you couldn't be a switchman, you couldn't be conductor or anything. Labor was all you could get at the time I started.
Okay.
Later on, they did start to putting on engineers. I think the government had something to do with it. During the time, they said they had to have so many blacks to explore these different avenues, and therefore they started hiring switchmen and hostlers and so forth.
One thing I didn't see, they didn't show the main man was on there.
Who's that?
That's a chair car attendant.
Ted Freeman, supervisor for chair car attendants, remembers.
See, what we had to do when the war broke out, it was very hard to get men to work. And they used to send me out to Vanport. That's where all the war people lived. And if I see a guy out there that wasn't working and didn't want to work in the shipyard, I'd try to get him to work for us.
The jobs of gandy dancer or track crews did not include the romance of riding the rails. Still, their contribution of skill and experience made the rail safe and efficient and played an important part in the expansion of black families into the West. The mystique of the legendary John Henry was to be found in the strain and sweat of the unglorious laborers. In addition to loading and unloading passengers and baggage, redcaps in every city were responsible for the custodial maintenance of the Union stations. Because they were often the people that passengers met first, they played an unofficial public relations role in the passenger rail business. While waiters and porters on the train spent hours and sometimes days with passengers, the redcaps relied on their one-time contact with passengers for a gratuity income. Former chief of redcaps, Phil Reynolds, pictured here with his family and son, Walt Reynolds, once a redcap and now a prominent physician in Portland, is an example of the legacy of labor, struggle, and railroad history for a number of black families in the Northwest.
The exploration of this particular era of railroading and the jobs blacks held reveals much about the common experience and determination of a dwindling collection of men, their families, and their work. The men of the pre-Amtrak era still live. This program has attempted to highlight the character and the stamina of those who left the South and the central United States and came to the Northwest.